The envelope was already in the trash can before I reached the door. I didn't run after it. I didn't raise my voice. I stood at the edge of the banquet hall, looked at my wife across 40 years of marriage, and I walked out. What happened in the next 30 minutes changed everything. Not because I planned it that way, but because the truth had been waiting a very long time. And that night, it finally got tired of waiting. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a mechanical engineer, the last 22 of which I gave entirely to a company that did not belong to me, but whose most valuable product would not exist without me. I know how that sounds. Every man who has ever been wrong believes he was the most important person in the room. I am not asking you to take my word for it. By the end of this, you will not need to. My wife's name is Gloria. We met when I was 31 and she was 28. She was working at her father's manufacturing company, Hargrove Industrial, as an office manager. I was brought in as a contract engineer to solve a production problem they had been fighting for 2 years. I solved it in 11 days. Her father, a man named Earl Hargrove, shook my hand and said I was the smartest man he had ever hired. Gloria was standing beside him when he said it. She smiled at me. That was the beginning. We married 14 months later. It was a small ceremony. My side of the family was modest. My mother, my brother, 2 cousins. Gloria's side filled 3 rows. Her mother, Margaret, looked at me the way people look at an unexpected charge on a restaurant bill. Polite enough, clearly displeased. She never warmed to me in 40 years. Not once. Earl passed away 6 years into our marriage. He left the company to Gloria and her brother, Richard. Richard had no interest in engineering or operations. He was a salesman, loud and charming, and useful at dinners. He handled clients. Gloria handled administration. And I still officially a contractor at that point, then eventually brought on as director of product development, handled everything that actually made the company work. I want to be clear about what I mean by that. In 1998, Hargrove Industrial was struggling. The manufacturing sector was shifting. Competitors were producing faster and cheaper. Earl's old methods were becoming obsolete. Gloria and Richard called an emergency meeting. I sat in that meeting as the only person in the room who understood what the problem actually was. I told them, I said the issue was not cost, it was design. Our components were being built to tolerances that made them incompatible with new automated assembly systems. I said I could redesign the core coupling mechanism, the part that connected our product to almost every major client's equipment, and make it universally compatible for the first time in the industry. Gloria looked at Richard. Richard looked at the ceiling. Then he said, "Can you actually do that, Daniel? Or are you just saying it to sound important?" I went home that night. I worked in my garage for 4 months. I filed the patent application myself, on my own time, with my own money. The filing fee was $340. I still have the receipt. The patent was granted in October of 1999. I brought the documentation to Gloria. I told her I wanted to license it to Hargrove Industrial, that I would give the company favorable terms because she was my wife and I wanted the family to succeed. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "Let me have Richard look at the paperwork." Richard looked at the paperwork. Then their attorney looked at the paperwork. Then a revised agreement appeared on my desk that transferred the patent into a holding company jointly owned by Hargrove Industrial and, nominally, myself. I was listed as a co-holder. In practice, all decisions about licensing, production, and commercialization went through the company's board, which Gloria chaired. I signed it. I want you to understand why. Because Gloria was my wife. Because I believed in the marriage more than I believed in protecting myself. Because my father taught me that a man who trusts his wife is not a fool, he is a husband. That patent became the foundation of Hargrove Industrial's next 2 decades of growth. The universal coupling system, as it came to be known in trade publications, was licensed to 47 manufacturers across North America and Europe. It generated, conservatively, somewhere between $18 and $22 million in licensing revenue over 20 years, not counting the production contracts it made possible. I know these numbers because I was in the meetings where they were discussed. I was also never in the meetings where the distributions were decided. My salary was good, my benefits were good, my name appeared in the company newsletter every Christmas. Gloria bought me a very nice watch for our 25th anniversary. I coached my son through college applications. I watched my daughter get married. I attended every family dinner, every holiday, every board retreat, every charity event Gloria's family considered important. And at every one of those events, I sat slightly to the side. Not literally, not always, But there was always a version of it, the conversation that stopped when I walked up, the decision that was made before I was consulted. The joke Richard told about the engineer that everyone laughed at, including Gloria, who would squeeze my hand afterward as though that settled it. I told myself this was family. I told myself that all families have their dynamics. I told myself that what mattered was the work, the legacy, the quiet satisfaction of knowing what I had built. I told myself a great many things in those years. Now I want to tell you about the night of the company's 40th anniversary gala. Hargrove Industrial's 40th anniversary, April of last year. A ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Hartford. 400 guests, a 12-piece band, 3-course dinner. The company had commissioned a short documentary film about its history, which would be screened after the main course. Gloria had been planning this event for 8 months. She talked about it constantly. She hired a publicist. She had a dress made. I was not consulted about the program. I found out about the documentary film 2 days before the event when a copy of the program card arrived in the mail, addressed to the house. I read through the evening's schedule. I looked for my name. I found it once, in the list of long-serving staff members printed in small type on the inside back panel, between a woman named Sheila who had worked in accounts payable for 22 years and a man named Pete who drove the delivery truck. I folded the program card and put it in my jacket pocket. The night of the gala, I dressed carefully. Dark suit, the good one. The tie Gloria gave me 2 Christmases ago. I was ready before she was, which was always the case. And I waited in the kitchen while she finished getting ready. When she came downstairs, she looked beautiful. And I told her so. She said, "Don't stand near Richard tonight. He's going to be with the Ellison account people, and I don't want it to be crowded." We arrived at the Whitmore at 6:45. A photographer was waiting near the entrance. He took our photograph. In the photograph, Gloria is looking at the camera. I am looking at her. That is the last photograph taken of us together. Inside the ballroom, we were separated almost immediately. Gloria was absorbed into a cluster of board members and their spouses. I was handed a drink by a server and pointed, gently but firmly, by Gloria's assistant toward a table near the back left of the room. Table 14. I counted the tables. There were 16. Table 14 was near the kitchen entrance. My table mates were 2 junior account managers, a recently retired office administrator named Carol, and 3 spouses of people whose names I did not recognize. Carol was kind. She asked me what I did for the company. I said I was in product development. She said that sounded interesting. I said it had been. Once. She laughed, not knowing what I meant. The dinner was served. The documentary film was screened. It was 11 minutes long. It began with Earl Hargrove in archival footage from the early 1980s. It moved through the company's history decade by decade. When it reached the late 1990s, the years of the patent, the years of the coupling system, the years that changed everything the narrator said, and I want to be precise about this, through bold leadership and strategic innovation, the Hargrove family guided the company into a new era of industry-leading products. My name was not spoken, not once in 11 minutes. I set down my fork. Carol beside me said quietly, "Are you all right?" I said, "I'm fine." And I meant it, actually, because something had become very clear to me while I sat at table 14 and watched 11 minutes of company history from which I had been erased. Something I had known for a long time but had refused to fully accept. I was not a member of this family. I was not a partner in this enterprise. I was a resource that had been used and filed and thanked with a good salary and a nice watch and a seat near the kitchen. And I had a decision to make. I reached into my jacket pocket. I had brought something with me that evening, not as a plan. I want to be honest about that. I had not come to that gala with any intention of confrontation. I had brought it because I had been carrying it for 2 weeks, since the day I retrieved it from our safety deposit box while Gloria was at her sister's for the weekend. I brought it because I had been thinking about what to do with it, and I had not yet decided, and somehow I thought the evening might help me decide. It was an envelope, legal size, cream-colored, slightly worn at the edges. Inside it were 3 documents. The original patent filing receipt from 1999, a copy of the patent certificate itself, and a letter on plain white paper that I had written to myself in the year 2001, shortly after I signed the agreement that transferred my patent into the holding company. In the letter I described in plain language what I had invented, when I had invented it, how I had paid for the filing, and what I had agreed to and why. I had signed and dated it, and had it witnessed by a notary public whose stamp was still clearly visible at the bottom of the page. I had written that letter because something in me knew, even then, not consciously, but somewhere quiet and practical, the engineer in me had known that you document what matters. You record what is real. You keep the receipt. After the documentary ended, Gloria moved through the room. She came to table 14 once, briefly. She put her hand on my shoulder, said everything good, without looking at me, and moved on. Richard gave a speech. He talked about his father. He talked about his vision for the next decade. He mentioned Gloria 4 times. He mentioned me once, in the sentence, and of course we couldn't do any of this without our incredible staff. There was applause. I put my hands together slowly. Then, the evening reached its final segment. The company's chairman, a man named Briggs, who had joined the board 3 years ago, announced that in honor of the 40th anniversary, Gloria would be presented with a special commemorative award recognizing her leadership and dedication. There was music. There was a small crystal trophy. There was a standing ovation. I did not stand. Not out of bitterness. Not out of spite. I simply could not make my body perform an action my conscience could not endorse. I sat at table 14 with my hands in my lap and watched my wife accept an award for a legacy that included my name nowhere. Gloria saw me. Across the room, amid the applause, her eyes found me sitting still. Her expression changed. Just briefly. Then she smiled at the crowd and held up the trophy. Afterward, as people gathered for dessert and drinks, Gloria came to me. She did not speak quietly. She was still on the energy of the award, the applause, the evening going exactly as she had planned. She came to my table and she said, "Why didn't you stand, Daniel?" I said, "I didn't feel like standing." She said, "Do you know how that looked? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" I said, "I imagine it looked like a man sitting down." Her voice dropped, but not much. "I don't know what your problem is tonight. You've been sitting over here in the corner like some kind of—" She stopped. She had seen the envelope on the table in front of me. "What is that?" I said, "Something I brought." She picked it up before I could say anything else. She opened it. She looked at the documents inside, not long enough to read them carefully, but long enough to understand what they were. And then, and this is the moment I will not forget, for whatever years remained to me, she closed the envelope, looked at me with an expression I did not recognize on the face of the woman I had been married to for 40 years, and she dropped it into the small trash receptacle at the edge of the table, the one the servers used for cocktail napkins. She said, "That's old business, Daniel. Tonight is not the time." Then she walked away. I looked at the trash receptacle. I looked at the envelope sitting on top of a folded cocktail napkin. I thought about what I had built. I thought about 1,999. I thought about the garage. I thought about $340 and 4 months of Saturdays and the receipt I still had in a folder in our home office. I reached into the trash receptacle and I took the envelope back. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, said goodnight to Carol, who was watching me with an expression of genuine concern, and I walked out of the Whitmore Hotel. The night air was cold for April. I stood on the sidewalk outside the entrance and I breathed it in. I was not sure what I was going to do. I was 62 years old. I had no plan. I had an envelope. A man was sitting on the steps of the parking structure across the street, older than me maybe, or the same age but lived differently. He had a paper coffee cup and a canvas bag, and he was watching the hotel entrance with the calm of someone who had nowhere particular to be. We made eye contact briefly. He nodded. I nodded back. I stood there for a few minutes. And then I made a decision, not about the envelope, about something larger, about the next chapter, about what a man does when he finally stops pretending that patience is the same as acceptance. I went back inside, not to rejoin the party. I went to find a business center the hotel concierge had pointed out earlier in the evening. I sat down at one of the computers. I sent 2 emails. The first was to a patent attorney I had researched 3 weeks earlier, a woman named Patricia Osei, whose firm specialized in intellectual property disputes. I had found her name in an industry journal. The email was brief. I said I had a matter I needed to discuss at her earliest convenience, that it involved a patent agreement from 1,999, and that I believe my rights as the original inventor may not have been properly preserved under the terms of the transfer agreement I had signed. I attached a photograph I had taken of the patent certificate. The second email was to my son. I told my son that I loved him. I told him I was about to do something that would be difficult for the family, and that I wanted him to hear it from me first, before he heard it from anyone else. I told him that I had spent a long time being quiet about things I should not have been quiet about, and that the quiet was ending. I told him I was sorry for the parts of his childhood I had been absent for because I was working. I told him the work had mattered, that it had been real, and that it was going to be acknowledged. Then I sent the emails and I went back outside. The man with the canvas bag was still on the parking structure steps. I walked across the street. I sat down next to him. His name, he told me, was Walter. He had worked in manufacturing for most of his life, he said, until the plant closed. That was 11 years ago. He asked me what I did. I said I was an engineer. He said that was good, that engineers built things that lasted. I said, sometimes they do. We sat there for a while. I told Walter what had happened inside the hotel. Not all of it, but the shape of it. He listened without interrupting, which is a rarer quality than people realize. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You got the paper?" I said I did. He said, "Then you're fine." I gave Walter my overcoat before I left. Not the envelope, the coat. He said he couldn't take it. I said it was April, and I had another one at home, and that was true. He accepted it. We shook hands. I called a car and went home. 3 weeks later, Patricia Osei's office sent a formal letter to Hargrove Industrial's board of directors. The letter cited specific provisions of the 1999 transfer agreement that, under current patent law precedent, had not adequately compensated the original inventor for the ongoing commercial use of the protected design. It noted that the patent, while co-held, had generated revenue streams in which my share had been systematically undervalued and, in several licensing agreements signed after 2009, effectively excluded through administrative restructuring that I had not reviewed or approved. The letter requested a meeting. The meeting happened. I was there with Patricia. Gloria was there with Richard and their attorney. I sat across the table from my wife of 40 years and I did not feel angry. I want you to know that I felt clear. Clarity is a different thing from anger. Clarity is what you get when you finally stop arguing with reality. The negotiation took 4 months. I will not describe every detail because some of it is still subject to a confidentiality agreement. What I can tell you is this. The settlement acknowledged my role as the original and sole inventor of the coupling system. It resulted in a financial arrangement that recognized 24 years of undercompensated licensing revenue, and it included a formal amendment to the company's public record of the patent that corrected the attribution so that anyone who looks it up now will see my name, not as a footnote, but as the inventor. Gloria and I separated during the negotiation. It was not dramatic. We had a conversation in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had waited for her the night of the gala, and we acknowledged what had been true for longer than either of us wanted to say out loud. She cried. I did too. 40 years is 40 years. You do not stop loving someone because you stop trusting them, but you cannot build a life on the shape of a thing when the substance is gone. My son called me after the settlement. He said he was proud of me. I told him I wasn't sure pride was the right word. He said, "What is the right word then?" I thought about it. I said maybe it was something like honesty. That I had finally been honest with her, with the company, with myself. He said that worked. I still have the envelope. The original documents, the patent certificate, the letter I wrote to myself in 2001. I keep it in the drawer of my desk in the apartment I moved into last fall. Sometimes I take it out and hold it without opening it. Not out of bitterness, more like the way you hold something you made with your hands a long time ago, just to remember that you made it. Carol, from table 14, sent me a card 3 months after the gala. She had heard something through the company grapevine, not the details, but the outline. The card said simply, "I had a feeling you were someone important. I'm glad it came out." She had signed it with her full name and added a small smiley face, which made me smile too. And Walter, I thought about Walter for a long time. I did not have a way to contact him. But 2 months after the gala, I went back to the parking structure across from the Whitmore. He was not there. I asked the attendant if he knew a man named Walter, who sometimes sat on the front steps. The attendant, a young man, said he knew who I meant, that an older gentleman used to sit there sometimes, but that he had not seen him in a while. He said someone had apparently helped the man get into a transitional housing program. He did not know who. I like to think it was someone who happened to be passing by on a cold April night. Someone who had a few minutes and decided to sit down. Someone who had just learned, or was just learning, that it is never too late to stop being quiet about what you built. My name is on the patent now. Anyone can look it up. That's where it was always supposed to be.